This presentation, titled The Role of Audits and ISO 9001:2015, Are You a Quality Auditor?, comes to us from Paul Simpson. Paul is the current chair of ISO TC 176, Subcommittee 2, the group responsible for maintaining ISO 9001, among other standards produced by the ISO Technical Committee. He also supports the development of standards for auditing, health and safety, and conformity assessment. Paul is an executive and non-executive director, specializing in risk, quality, and management systems, working with a mission to keep it real. He's an experienced developer of systems within organizations. With a first degree in engineering, Paul has extended his postgraduate qualifications into fields of marketing and business, as well as professional areas of auditing, health and safety, and quality. Throughout his career, he has been applying quality principles for risk management, quality planning, and business improvement to enable organizations to move forward with control. And with that, take it away, Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. And thank you to Exemplar for inviting me to take part in this Auditor Expo. Firstly, by way of introduction, I was asked to contribute to the Expo following an article I published on risk and remote auditing. I'll happily send out links to the article and others I've produced if people want to contact me at the event. Now, I'm deliberately avoiding the same topic, as I understand from conversations with Mike, that Exemplar has some other great presenters covering risk and remote auditing elsewhere in the program. Firstly, my interest in this space is career-long and is currently primarily influenced by my role as chair of ISO TC 176 Subcommittee 2, the group responsible for maintaining ISO 9001 and ISO 9004, among other standards produced by ISO Technical Committee TC 176. However, I've been involved with auditing and quality for over 35 years and have spent time in manufacturing and service, including roles in training, certification, and consultancy. The title of my presentation is, What Does a Quality Auditor Look Like? It deliberately both covers audits of quality management systems, QMS, and the personal qualities of an auditor of those systems. So the first slide, a little bit of a scene setting, a bit of a quiz question. For how long has ISO 9001 been talking about audits? And in the text of the slide, or the options on the slide, you get to see the 5 editions of ISO 9001, from the first in 1987 all the way through to the 5th edition of 9001 published in 2015. So what is the answer to the question? Well, the answer is 1987. So for as long as quality management system standards have been around, there has been a need to audit them to ensure the systems are working as intended. These are internal audits. The requirement was built in because the organization's leaders need to have feedback as to how well the systems are operating, because these are the systems they have invested resources into in the form of time, people, equipment, and money. But that same feedback principle applies to internal, supplier, and audit supporting third-party conformity assessment equally. A good audit provides great feedback and paints a picture of the organization and how effective and efficient it is. There is a problem, however, that there is far too much variability in the current process. And this means that interested parties, whether it's for internal, supplier, or third-party conformity assessment audits, are less able to rely on the audit results. So in this session, I'll look at some of the causes of this poor reputation and the areas that we can focus on to improve the quality and the credibility of audit. So in this next slide, we ask the question of what is audit, or what is an audit? And I've presented this in a word cloud format. And you can see the clouds in the word pick up on key aspects of audit. So you will see, if you look close enough, ISO 9001, other related standards like ISO IEC 17021-1, and we also see for quality management systems the competence standard, ISO IEC 17021-3. There's also ISO 19011. And again, if you pick between the words, you can see some of the key elements that make up quality and audit. So we see quality, we see process, and we see other key terms related to a quality management system. But it's the larger text that I'd like to draw your attention to, starting at the top with risk-based approach. And it continues down through the cloud and ends up with confidentiality. Now, these are the principles of audit as described in ISO 19011, which is the guidance standard for auditing management systems. These should underpin all audits, internal, second party, third party. And in a short time, I'll suggest that there are failings, and those are primarily with regard to the principles, fair presentation, and evidence-based approach. So that takes us to auditor competence. And in auditor competence, when I talk about auditor competence, I've broken it down into these 3 bullets that you can see on the screen right now. I'll take you through each one from the standpoint of a third-party audit of a supplier. Now, the same questions apply to internal and supplier audits, but third party is probably the most difficult test of competence. And again, I'll try and explain a little bit of as why I think it is that way. So the first bullet is requirements. So what are the requirements that a third party auditor needs to understand? Some of them are covered in the earlier word cloud. And one of them we mentioned, and I'll start with ISO 9001. How well do the auditors understand the clauses of the standard? There are requirements throughout 9001 that are good and best practice for quality management. And again, later on in this presentation, we'll have a look at 9004 as a way into understanding all of those requirements as they apply to organizations. The second bullet is expectations. And when we talk about expectations in the context of a third-party audit, there are 3 key areas that we'd like to focus on. The one is of the organization being audited. As part of fair presentation, the organization expects the auditor to hold up a mirror to the organization that accurately reflects how they see themselves. Now, if there is a disconnect between the organization's view of how they are and the auditor's view, that is where you get the conflict. The second group I'd like to highlight are the organization's customers. So the organization's customers may choose to use a supplier on the basis of a third-party certification. So their expectations are that the audit of the system reflects what they can expect as customers of the organization and users of the products and services that the organization provides. And the third area of competence is of the organization itself. So any third-party auditor going in to audit an organization should be familiar with the type of organization and the type of market they operate in, the type of organizational environment that they have. And again, we'll come back to this when we look at quality competence in a second. But without understanding the organization and how it operates and the market in which it operates, it's very difficult for a third-party auditor to be deemed to be competent. And this takes me on to the next slide, which is quality competence. And you can see here, I'm going to transfer from ISO 9001, which is the requirement standard, to ISO 9004, which is another standard in the TC 176 Subcommittee 2 portfolio, and it provides guidance on quality management. But let's look at the title of 9004 as we see it in the slide. ISO 9004 2018, Quality Management, Quality of an Organization. So you can see here we have moved beyond the products and services that the organization provides and the customers that it serves and the degree to which those products and services meet their needs and expectations to the quality of the organization itself. And this standard, continuing with the title, provides guidance to achieving sustained success. So 9004 takes us beyond the sort of transactional approach to quality of buying products and buying services and saying, is this an organization that has its own quality? So the first question as a quality auditor is, do you have to know and understand ISO 9004? And if you look at all the supporting standards like IEC 17021, 19011, they do not require that. But again, I'll come back to that point at the end of this slide. So if we look at the bulleted list on the slide, these are most of the clauses of ISO 9004. Now, if I pick the first one, context, this is a clause that's also in 9001. But the challenge for the quality auditor is, how does the organization itself understand their context, the market they operate in? Back to that piece on auditor competence, there is an expectation that the auditor will understand this operating environment, perhaps by having worked in the sector themselves. The question becomes, how else would you understand it? And that's a test for the quality auditor. And the next bullet, identity. Now, this is a new requirement. There are key questions here about the organization's culture, vision, mission, and values. How much do you as an auditor understand these terms? How are you able to robustly test the organization's processes here? And the next one, leadership. As an auditor, with your experience, how familiar are you with the different arrangements for organization structure? How willing are you to challenge top leaders about their approach to leadership in the quality space, to test that it's relevant and appropriate? Because these are significant challenges for the quality auditor and the auditor who has gone beyond the transactional product and service type auditing. And next we have process management. ISO 9001 has been built around the process approach since the 2000 edition. Now, as an auditor, can you actually get under the skin of a process? As you audit, you need to test and check to see how much time has the organization spent on ensuring the processes are the best they can be to serve the organization and a strategic purpose. This is not a checkbox approach. It requires great understanding of how organizations operate, the processes that they use, and the technical areas, the key criteria that manage those processes. And then the next area, resource management. Another key area that many auditors are unfamiliar with or are uncomfortable with. All of the organization's support systems are critical to performance and to ensuring that the processes can operate as intended and deliver products and services that satisfy the organization's customers. And if we pick just one subclause here, many auditors have no knowledge or experience on the area of people aspects of quality. So how then can you audit in this area when you need to evaluate the organization's approach to competence and to engagement of people in the work? So requirements from 9001, but the guidance in 9004 goes much deeper. And next to performance evaluation, or performance analysis and evaluation. So for the QMS to be effective, we need to have appropriate measures in place, appropriate measures of performance. And the auditor should be using their knowledge of organizational context to test those measures to see that they are relevant for the industry or for the sector that the organization operates in. Additionally, all the objectives should have the SMART test applied to them. So there's many versions of SMART, but the one I've used in the notes is specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related. You can use all the other variants on the SMART acronym that you wish, but the auditor needs to test the process for analysing results and for setting objectives. And back to the analysis of results, if the KPIs are in place and the analysis is in place, how does the organisation pick up on the data that comes from that analysis and provide the feedback to top management to enable them to set future objectives? So again, huge amount of depth there to give a really credible assessment of an organisation. And finally, into improvement, learning, and innovation. Again, these are all areas that are touched on within 9001, but in 9004, these are much more amplified. So as an auditor going to an organisation, you need to assess, you need to be able to judge how the organisation learns from previous experience. So from all the information, the data that comes back from the KPIs, lessons learned, handling non-conformity, handling complaints, and dealing with the data from that. What about innovation? Would you feel comfortable auditing an organisation for its approach to innovation? Because 9004 has a whole area there about innovation and how the organisation should tap into areas and opportunities for improvement and for innovation. A quality auditor should be able to do that. Now, ISO 9004 is not currently a certification standard, but does that mean that you can't audit to it? I would say you can, because the point of 9004 and the guidance within it and the maturity model that's at the back of the standard is that it gives you pointers as to how the organisation should manage itself. And you can assess there to see that the organisation is following that best practice and is able to demonstrate that it is a quality organisation. But aside from that, the point of drawing my attention, or drawing your attention to this standard and to the depth of knowledge that it requires, is that it's my personal belief that all auditors should be familiar with the principles and tools of quality management before they become auditors. Now, that could be through prior learning, prior experience, following your own particular guru, whether that's Deming or Duran or Feigenbaum or Crosby or any of the other gurus, or, as in this case, as I've suggested, by studying the guidance on effective quality management produced by ISO TC 176 in the form of ISO 9004. I leave it up to you, but the quality auditor, in preparing for a quality audit, should have a good knowledge of all those quality management tools and techniques. And so to the landscape. The one thing that is constant in life is change. We're all experiencing a period of massive change at the moment. There are many organizations who will not survive this pandemic, unfortunately. Lockdown has disrupted work patterns, disrupted supply chains, and has affected how we relate to our neighbors, our friends, and our family. We probably won't experience this again in our lifetimes, but it is a factor of life at the moment. Change is constant. Now, certainly I'm not on the same level, nothing in comparison to the pandemic, but Annex SL, so the core high-level structure and common text of all the management systems that ISO produces, all the management system standards, is being revised. So probably in about a year's time, we will have a new version of Annex L that we will look at for the core of management system standards in the future. Similarly, if we look at one of the management system standards that ISO produces, ISO 9001, so the quality management system requirements. In July of this year, the systematic review of ISO 9001 begins, and the national standards bodies, the NSBs, will vote over whether the world's best-selling standard is revised to a 6th edition. Now, I'm not going to prejudge what the NSBs decide. Whatever they decide, at some point, TC 176 will make changes to ISO 9001. And its users, so people on this webinar, will have to evaluate those changes and the impacts on their quality management systems and on their roles as auditors. And similarly, if we take that down a step further, we have sector schemes, IATF 16949, the automotive industry will look to ensure that the sector scheme continues to deliver parts quality from its supply chain. And it will continue to work on its certification scheme to ensure that it remains credible. AS 9100, similarly, the aerospace sector, again going through some very tough times at the moment because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But they will need to ensure that the AS 9100 requirement standard works for them in the future. And a final example on sector schemes, it's a small number of sectors of users of 9001 as a core. ISO TS 22163, the rail sector. So they're looking to build on the 1st edition of the rail industry sector scheme and looking to build a certification scheme based around the technical specification that gives rail companies supply chain confidence. And then what about your own organizations? If you have a think about them, there are always changes within organizations that the QMS needs to manage. There's even a requirement in ISO 9001 that you manage your changes. But it's more important actually that your organization manages the changes itself to ensure that it can continue to operate effectively. The audit process that we've been looking at is a key component of the feedback to top management on how well the system is working, including how you manage change. And the final bullet on this slide is audit methods. And this sort of brings me full circle to the original article that led to my appearing on this series of webinars. Audit methods are continually changing. The COVID-19 crisis has led to a huge explosion in remote audits. A competent auditor will be able to adapt their approach and the method of auditing, but the end result will be reliable. An incompetent auditor, on the other hand, will deliver a worse result through remote auditing, and the people who rely on that audit result will be even more at risk. So that's it from me. First, thanks very much for your participation. I hope you've had some value from this. I'm very happy to take questions, not now, because this is a pre-recorded webinar, but afterwards, please feel free to contact me, and I will do my best to ensure that you get a response. The notes that I've used as part of this preparation for the webinar will be available through a download shortly after this event. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
And thank you, Paul Simpson, for that perspective on quality auditors. And that concludes this presentation.